we have now been able to achieve some kind of global optimality. That is the point I was trying to make. By doing hill climbing with random restarts, by doing hill climbing with random walk, by doing simulated annealing, all of these are asymptotically optimal. In the limit of infinite time, you will get to the global optimum for whatever reason, different reasons, right. Now, let us build this algorithm further, not this, but this general space of algorithms. We are saying that at any point in time, I have only one current node. Now, go back to what we used to do in the previous systematic search algorithms, exhaustive search algorithms. We would do breadth first search, and in breadth first search we will have a full frontier of nodes. And now we are saying, oh, that's taking too much memory, so I will take one. And that's an extreme reaction to the memory problem. So, can you think of an alternative algorithm which relaxes this assumption that I only have one current node? Simple question. What's your name? Harsh. Harsh says, let's start with few random nodes, not just one random node. This is not that deep, sort of obvious. Okay, but then if let's say I start with k nodes, let's say I am simply doing greedy hill climbing, right. I start with k nodes, I look at each of their neighbors and I pick the best. Now, what should I do? How many best should I pick? K. I started with k, let me pick k best. Can you guess which algorithm this is coming closer to? Okay, somebody is running ahead of me, we will come back to that, but an algorithm that we have studied so far. Random restarts. Is it coming closer to random restarts by any stretch? What is the random restart part here? Well, you have a good point. Again, I am going to come back to that, but let us first give this algorithm a name. So, go back to the algorithms that we studied. Where did we say that we will take at most k beam search? Exactly. See, in beam search we said lots of successors, but I have limited memory, so I will keep the k of them. So, this algorithm is called local beam search, and it says keeping only one node in the memory is an extreme reaction to the memory problems. Let us keep k, big deal. And initially I have k randomly selected states, random restart, think about it. Next, determine all the successes of k states, as many. If any of the successes is goal, you are done, of course, if there is a goal. Otherwise, select the k best successors from this set of successors, and that is your new beam. So, instead of just carrying one current node, I have k current nodes at any point in time. I have a beam of size k. Now, is it, so that is now Sukriti's question, is it equal to doing k random restart searches in parallel? Yes or no? How many of you think it is equivalent to doing k random restart searches? How many of you think it is not equal to doing k random restart searches? Okay. Person in the red, what's your name? Path, why?
Because here we can have out of each k, say n from a single.
It is possible that 2 or 3 of the next states come from the same successor list of the same initial node. So, this is not, because what is going to happen, it's possible that multiple next nodes are from the same hill. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It is a bad thing. We started with a diverse set, and then very soon we are moving towards 1 or 2 hills. So, our diversity is lost. So, how can we fix it? You can keep a limit on how many states you can keep from a certain hill. That's a good idea. What's your name? Divyansh says this. Another idea? Okay, so he says don't select k best, select k by 2 best, and the rest? You choose bad options with some probability. What's your name? Ishan. Okay, so Ishan says select some of the best ones, and for the others do some random probability jump. And so this kind of an algorithm would be called a stochastic local beam search. It basically says choose k successors randomly, biased towards good ones, and if you want we can also make sure that some of the top few ones are also in it, as you say, right. Everybody with me? Not too terribly complicated, right? So I mean it's sort of obvious. As you start building up an idea, you start to get into these places. So you start with local beam search. You say instead of 1 I will keep k, I will take all the neighbors, take the best k, but now all the best k are coming very close to in one hill. I don't want to do that, so let me just randomly sample the successors with higher successors with a higher probability and worse successors with lower probability. Now observe the natural analogy to the natural selection process that happens in the world. I have lots of insects, and then the better ones live and the worse ones die, and then they have their children, and the better ones live and the worse ones die. This is sort of natural selection. But this is like amoeba natural selection. Why is this like amoeba natural selection and not like human natural selection? Sorry? If we take successors in amoeba, the parent doesn't live anymore. Sure, that's a good point, but there is a better answer to this. No, I agree with you. You have a point. What's your name? Purva. So yes, I agree, but there is another thing I was looking for. So how many parents does a child have in local beam search? See, I have many successors. I am strong enough to create children. I don't need anybody else to create a child. Unisexual reproduction, asexual reproduction, as they say, right? So this is the idea of local beam search, that I will create children and the better children will live. But now that we have reached this far, let us create an algorithm that is similar to humans and their style of reproduction. And so that algorithm is called genetic algorithms. Okay. And also called evolutionary algorithms, which is what Ishan was also referring to earlier. And what are they going to change, by the way, if you think about it? If you had to create genetic algorithms, what would you say? How would you change stochastic local beam search? I have a beam of size k. What would I do? I will take what? Okay, almost, very close. He says, what's your name? Abhyuday. Abhyuday says, I will have two successors and I will somehow make their combination. That could work too. But you know, I am looking for a child who has two parents. So who are my parents? The initial set of k. So how will I create my successors? I will somehow take two parents from this list, two nodes from this list, and somehow create a successor which has properties of both. So this is what happens. Eye is like the father and lips like the mother. That kind of thing. That's exactly what we want to do. And how is that achieved in humans? What operation? Genes, but what operation? I know you are engineering students, your biology is really weak, but somebody must know. What operations between genes leads us to some property of the father and some property of the mother? Pattern matching. You guys are too machine learning-y. Come on, get your genetics right first. Look, it's a very you know this in 11th and 10th biology definitely you are taught, but I think even in 9th and 10th you are taught. We have genes or we have all these chromosomes or whatever, I don't even know my words right, but some operation happens so that the final outcome is one of this and one of that. Sorry, I can't hear you, but anyway the word I am looking for is crossing over, right? You have read this, right? Crossing over operation. So that is exactly how we are going to create our genetic algorithm. So we will create a state as a string. So this is how genetic algorithms work. It is nothing more than a twist on local search, technically local beam search, where successor is generated by combining two parent states. A state is represented by a string over a finite alphabet. For example, let us take this our n queens problem or 8 queens problem. We can say that we have numbered all the rows from 1 to 8 and all the columns from 1 to 8, and the string representation would be for the first column where is the queen, for the second column where is the queen, for the third column where is the queen, like 1, 6, 2, 5, 7 and so on and so forth. So this string represents the state. And now what we have to do is that we will start with k states because we are in local beam search. So I have k states like this, each state has a string representation, but in the world of genetic algorithms we are going to call it the population. These are all the humans in my current generation, okay? And we have associated a fitness function, right? And the fitness function is exactly the same fitness function or slightly different than of what we are trying to optimize. So for example, in this case our fitness function is number of non-attacking pairs in 8 queens problem. So the fitness function sort of doesn't change. And now we are going to simulate evolution, and so we are going to do 3 steps. We are going to do random selection, which is saying that naturally fit parents survive, the less fit parents die. And then we are going to marry them, or they do not have to marry, but they will produce children, and they will produce children by 2 steps. One step is crossing over and one step is mutation, random mutation, which is also what happens in our gene pool, randomly some genes change. And then we will create a next new population, and the process will continue. Let us understand this with an example. So let us say we have these 4 states as our population. For each of those 4 states, I can compute the number of non-attacking pairs of queens. So this has 24, this has 23, this has 20 and this has 11. So which state is the least fit? The last state. Which state is the most fit? The first state. Very good. So now what we do, I take all these numbers, the fitness numbers, and divide by the sum, and that gives me the percentage of fitness. I have to convert it into a percentage because I need to have a natural selection process which will flip a coin with some probability. So basically what happens is the first state has 31% fitness, the second state has 29% fitness, the third state has 26% fitness, and the fourth state has 14% fitness. Now I randomly sampled 2 parents. Let's say I randomly sampled the second parent and the first parent. So this is, I copy the second parent here and the first parent here. Now these are the gene sequences that I have to do crossing over. Now if you understand what is crossing over, you have one sequence, you have the other sequence, they cross, which means first part of first parent and second part of second parent, they come together to create a new string, and that is exactly what we are going to do. So for that we need to figure out a crossing over point. So let us say we randomly figure out that 3 is my crossing over point. So now I will take 3 to 7 from the first and 4, 8, 5, 5, 2 from the second and create that as my new child. And I will take 2, 4, 7 from the second and 5, 2, 4, 1, 1 from the first and create that as my new child. And so I have now created these 2 new children, 3274855 24752 411, and if you think about it, they are not close to either of the parents. Does that make sense? This as a string is a relatively different string from where what parents it came from. And then you can also simulate random mutation. So you can say, oh, randomly I'm going to flip this 5 to 1. It's a random gene change. So this 5 becomes 1. I don't do any mutation here. Maybe this 7 becomes 2. Maybe I have 2 mutations somewhere. So with a small probability, I take a random thing and change it. And this is like a simple successor. What was happening in the simple successor? I was changing only one queen in that column. That's this random mutation is not different from that. It's exactly the same. But after this random mutation, what I get 4 new children. So this basically I get a new population, and I can repeat the process. So where is the natural selection happening? Which step is the natural selection happening? First step, when I am sampling a parent for reproduction, that is when natural selection is happening. I am less fit parent, I am sort of giving less probability of being sampled. Where is crossing over happening? Crossing over is happening on explicitly when I am combining the two strings. Where is mutation happening, or where is the individual change happening? That is happening at the last step. Now intuitively what is happening, right? Let us think about it. So this was my first parent and this was my second parent, and they individually were good. But now what I did, I took one part of this and the other part of this and created a chessboard out of it. So you can think of crossing over as a completely non-local jump. You know, if you go back to the vocabulary of local search, the vocabulary of local search is that I was making local changes in the local neighborhood. That means if I am given one solution, I was making only one change in the solution or very small change in the solution, so that my new state is very similar to the original state, hopefully with a better objective function. Now I have sort of foregone that. I am saying that I have two good states and I am crossing over in a way such that the jump that I make is a very huge jump in my local neighborhood. If I had to go from this state to this state, it is going to happen in 5 moves, and if I have to go from this state to this state, it may happen in 3 moves or whatever. But this particular phenomenon is going to be really helpful, because if it works for humans, it should work for machines also. Another way of saying it is that in typical local search, we were only making small local changes, and now we have allowed ourselves to make a very high jump in the search space. That ought to be good for something. Moreover, these are not random local jumps, these are good local jumps because the original states were good. Now it is possible that we did crossing over at a point where the structure of the problem got lost, and so the new state is really bad. But does that hurt us? No, in the next population, in natural selection, it's going to just die. So it doesn't matter. But it is possible that in this way we will suddenly hit on some very nice configuration, which will develop further and lead me to a really good solution. Okay?
You can also use a very good solution, like if there's one with very high fitness, after crossing over, only half of it will remain.
You have to repeat this. So if I have a very good solution in my current population, what do you want?
State with very high fitness.
Yes.
After crossing over, that state will get lost.
Right. So good question. What's your name? Harkirat says that if I found a really good state in my previous iteration, previous population, then because of crossing over, that will be lost. Is that a good thing? Of course not. If we have found a really good state, we should not lose it. So how can we fix it? Yeah, just send the best state forward or the best few states forward in the population. Those states are called champions in this vocabulary of genetic algorithms. So just make sure that the champion moves forward, right? And if a new champion comes, then that champion moves forward. So Vishwajit says, how do you say it is similar to humans? Okay. Okay, so now the question is, in which ways is it similar to humans and in which ways is it not similar to humans, right? That's sort of the question we have to ask. So, if you think about how the child's actual sequence, chromosome sequence or whatever it is comes out, the operations are very similar, not unlike that, right. Now, if we have children which are highly diseased, then maybe very early in their life they die, unfortunately. So, there is some little bit of natural selection there, right, or they lead their life and not very effectively, right. So, that is where that happens, and there is mutations in our bodies also. So, that is where they are similar. Now, how is it not similar? Well, the champion never dies only in genetic algorithms. That does not happen in real world. What else? Oh, the heuristic function that we are defining here is different from humans. Of course, humans are not optimizing for the number of non-attacking pairs of queens. Humans are optimizing for something else, right? And the hope was, and the belief was, that humans are optimizing also for fitness functions. That fitter bodies or fitter people would do a better job of having their children in the next generation, and that sort of gene pool will sort of take over time. Now, it is actually an interesting question whether that is the truth or not. So, let us talk about this. Now that we have understood genetic algorithms, let us just quickly critique the genetic algorithm. So, genetic algorithm is nothing more than a stochastic beam search. So, it is just a variant of stochastic beam search which does its successor production in a certain way. The fundamental difference comes from the crossing over and not from anything else, because the idea of random selection is already part of stochastic beam search. The idea of mutation is already part of the local moves in stochastic beam search. The main idea that it brings to the table is the idea of crossing over. And that is the positive point, that because of crossing over, random exploration can find solutions that local search cannot, because of suddenly bringing together two solutions and jumping in a very far away space. And notice this whole idea of human evolution, etc., is metaphorical, right? That makes sense to you, right? This is where the intuition comes, but after that it is a specific algorithm, right? So, we will use the word neural networks, but that is not how our brains are made. We will use the word stimulated annealing, but that is not exactly how liquids are cooled. We will make the use of the word genetic algorithms, but actually people do not live their life in that particular fashion. If they lived like that, it will be quite sad. Now, what are the negative points with respect to the algorithm itself? It has a large number of tunable parameters. What size of the population should you start with? How many parents do you create a new? So, you can do crossing over with 2, you can do crossing over with 3, you can do crossing over with 4. We are no longer in the very nice world where a child has 2 parents, a child can have many parents, right? We are in the modern world. And similarly, you may figure out what is the mutation probability. So, there are lots of these knobs, and a specific combination of the knobs can sometimes get you a very good solution, but a slightly different knob may not give you the equally good solution. So, the algorithms may be sensitive to these parameters. Earlier on, there were a lot of good empirical studies, but they were found to be successful on small set of problems, but in general there was no convincing evidence that genetic algorithms are better than hill climbing with random restarts. Now, I would also point out that this particular point of critique also comes from the politics in which the field of machine learning has evolved and AI has evolved in the last 15, 20, 30 years. Genetic algorithms was a very important part of AI, I would say in the 80s and the 90s. At some point, people started seeing genetic algorithms researchers as people who are not formal enough, people who are whose methods are difficult to reproduce, because of which there was a little bit of an ostracization, or the genetic algorithms researchers sort of got ostracized from machine learning conferences. It is very interesting how politics of science also works with how the science moves forward. So, over time genetic algorithms folks created a different community completely, and so they started publishing in this area called Gecko, in this conference called Gecko, and you would no longer find genetic algorithms based work in AAAI, ICHCAI, NeurIPS and so on and so forth that prominently. Is it because genetic algorithms are not a good algorithm? It's a difficult question for us to answer. In fact, when the neural network revolution happened in the last 5 years, actually there is a little bit of resurgence of evolutionary algorithms also. So, when I used to teach this algorithm 5 years ago, I would often say that, oh, genetic algorithms don't work. But I do not say that anymore, A, because I know slightly better, because I have seen that there is a historical reason why we were trained to say that genetic algorithms do not work better, but also because in the latest times there are some successes that are coming out of the evolutionary computation community in the context of training neural networks, in the context of training reinforcement learning agents and so on and so forth. So, therefore, I would say the jury is still out. In fact, if you read Pedro Domingos's The Master Algorithm, which is a very famous book for machine learning person, everybody should read it. He talks about 5 different tribes of machine learning. He says all these tribes are trying to come up with the master algorithm, one algorithm that is going to solve all problems, all machine learning problems. And of course, his ideas are, do frequentist computations or do Bayesian computations or do, neural network computations, etc., etc. But one of the tribes that he talks about is evolutionary computation tribe, is the genetic algorithms tribe. So, at this point I would let you figure it out, right? You try it, it's one of another possible things that you can try in the world when you come up with a new problem. It is not my favorite. I still go for greedy hill climbing with random restarts, but there is some value that genetic algorithms offer. The other thing I would say is that there is some research in the theory community which says that we as people are not optimizing for fitness. And that's actually a very interesting question in and of itself. That in the world that we live in, is it really happening that we are much fitter than what we were 100 years ago? In fact, it is found that if some particular person has a certain combination of genes which makes this person extremely fit, there is a good chance that in the next generation that particular combination of genes would be lost. And that confuses us, because that is in conflict with the genetic algorithms thesis that if you keep doing this, you will get fitter and fitter and fitter. And so, what these researchers have sort of found out by simulation and analysis is that we as communities, as people or as organisms, we are not optimizing for fitness, we are optimizing for this other phenomenon called mixability. And mixability says that if I find a random woman in this world to reproduce with, there is a good chance that my child would be healthy. I have the ability of mixability. I can mix with many people, not just one person. And that is something that we are optimizing, because as people it is very hard to find the perfect match for us. So, the idea of that I still as an organism want to spread my generations further, and so I am saying that I can do it by mixing with different kinds of people. I am not looking for a very perfect fit. And so, as an animal, humans are optimizing for mixability and not fitness. And that brings back the question in the context of genetic algorithms, where genetic algorithms must be really optimizing for fitness or something else. We don't know. That could be also a reason why they were not considered very successful in a lot of cases. So, I will keep my critique at this point. I don't know all the answers, but these are sort of the parts of the puzzle that I know with respect to genetic algorithms. Before I stop, I will take 2 more minutes and say one more thing, which is that local search is to me one of the most important algorithms in the field of AI. If I am given a really large problem, any systematic search algorithm will fail more often than not, because the problem size would be too high. Whereas a local search algorithm would be able to give me something, a good answer more often than not. And in fact, this thing becomes even more salient and prominent when we work in the world of continuous variables. So, in local search our variables were discrete and we were making local discrete moves. But suppose we are in the world of continuous functions, we can always use discretization and hill climbing, but nobody does that. What people end up using is gradient descent or gradient ascent, but that is nothing more than the local search version in the continuous space. Because if you have a complicated function that you are optimizing, think a neural network or any kind of machine learning algorithm, then it will have some kind of a topology. There will be some hill that I am interested in reaching. I am interested in reaching a certain xy value, and now if there are too many values and it is a very complicated function, then how do I optimize it? Well, I take the derivative with respect to x, take the derivative with respect to y, and make moves in that direction. And again, the intuitions are similar. If I start here and start making moves, I might be stuck in local optimum. If I start here and start making moves, I might reach the global optimum. So, all the intuitions that we have learned in local search get somehow applicable in the context of optimization, although their form changes a little bit. For example, in gradient and ascent, we first compute the gradients, then we change each variable in the direction of the gradient. Now, what is the notion of gradient? The notion of gradient is where is my closest neighbor in the greedy direction. That is the idea of gradient eventually. What is the idea of learning rate? The learning rate is how much do I change. Now, that is different, because in discrete we were making discrete moves. So, we did not need that the amount that we will change with. Now, we have this learning rate, this is this lambda, and it tells me how much do I move in the direction for gradient if I am doing ascent, or direction opposite the gradient if I am doing descent. And there are many algorithms to figure out how to select lambda. Like one algorithm is you start with x, you add lambda, and then you add 2 lambda, then you add 4 lambda, and you keep doing it until your objective function is improving. And at some point it starts reducing, then you stop and you take the previous lambda, and that is your lambda that you want to output. Right. This is called line search. So, the main point here is that intuitively at some meta point, most popular algorithms in machine learning and AI are doing some kind of local search. This is not always true. A star is not local search, A star is still useful. There are other algorithms which are useful, but a lot of modern machine learning algorithms at least are local search in continuous space, and that is called gradient ascent or descent. So, with that I will stop. This completes our lecture on local search, and in next class we will start talking about how to play games.